Fred Saberhagen, Berserker, Part 1. I, third historian of the Compound race, in gratitude to the Earth-descended race for their defense of my world, set down here for them my fragmentary vision of their great war against our common enemy. The vision has been formed piece by piece through my contacts in past and present time with the minds of men and machines. In these minds, alien to me, I often perceive what I cannot understand, yet what I see is true. And so I have truly set down the acts and words of earth-descended men, great and small and ordinary, the words and even the secret thoughts of your heroes and your traitors. Looking into the past, I have seen how in the 20th century of your Christian calendar, your forefathers on Earth first built radio detectors capable of sounding the deeps of interstellar space. On the first day, when whispers in our alien voices were first detected, straying in across the enormous intervals, the universe of stars became real to all Earth's nations and all her tribes. They became aware of the real world surrounding them, a universe strange and immense beyond thought, possibly hostile, surrounding and shrinking all Earthmen alike. Like island savages, just become aware of the great powers existing on and beyond their ocean, your nations began sullenly, mistrustfully, almost against their will, to put aside their quarrels with one another. In the same century, the men of old Earth took their first steps into space. They studied our alien voices whenever they could hear us. And when the men of old Earth began to travel faster than light, they followed our voices to seek us out. Your race and mine studied each other with eager science and with great caution and courtesy. We, Karmpan, and our older friends are more passive than you. We live in different environments and think mainly in different directions. We pose no threat to Earth. We saw to it that Earthmen were not crowded by our presence. Physically and mentally, they had to stretch to touch us. Ours, all the skills of keeping peace. Alas, for the day unthinkable that was to come, the day when we wished ourselves warlike. You of Earth found uninhabited planets where you could thrive in the warmth of suns much like your own. In large colonies and small, you scattered yourselves across one segment of one arm of our slow-turning galaxy. To your settlers and frontiersmen, the galaxy began to seem a friendly place, rich in worlds hanging ripe for your peaceful occupation. The alien immensity surrounding you appeared to be not hostile after all. Imagined threats had receded behind horizons of silence and vastness. And so, once more, you allowed among yourselves the luxury of dangerous conflict, carrying the threat of suicidal violence. No enforceable law existed among the planets. On each of your scattered colonies, individual leaders maneuvered for personal power, distracting their people with real or imagined dangers posed by other Earth-descended men. All further exploration was delayed. In the very days when the new and inexplicable radio voices were first heard drifting in from beyond your frontiers, the strange, soon-to-be terrible voices that conversed only in mathematics. Earth and Earth's colonies were divided, each against all by suspicion, and in mutual fear were rapidly training and arming for war. And at this point, the very readiness for violence that had sometimes so nearly destroyed you proved to be the means of life's survival. To us, the compound watchers, the withdrawn seers and touchers of minds, it appeared that you had carried the crushing weight of war through all your history, knowing that it would at last be needed, that this hour would strike when nothing less awful would serve. When the hour struck and our enemy came without warning, you were ready with swarming battle fleets. You were dispersed and dug in on scores of planets and heavily armed. Because you were, some of you and some of us are now alive. Not all our compound psychology, our logic and vision and subtlety would have availed us anything. The skills of peace and tolerance were useless, for our enemy was not alive. What is thought that mechanism seems to bring it forth? Without a thought, the machine was a vast fortress containing no life, set by its long-dead masters to destroy anything that lived. It and many others like it were the inheritance of Earth from some war fought between unknown interstellar empires in some time that could hardly be connected with any earthly calendar. One such machine could hang over a planet colonized by men and in 2 days pound the surface into a lifeless cloud of dust and steam 100 miles deep. This particular machine had already done just that. It used no predictable thought, no predictable tactics in its dedicated, unconscious war against life. The ancient, unknown gamesman had built it as a random factor, to be loosed in the enemy's territory to do what damage it might. Men thought its plan of battle was chosen by the random disintegrations of atoms in a block of some long-lived isotope buried deep inside it, and so was not even in theory predictable by opposing brains, human or electronic. Men called it a berserker. Del Murray, sometime computer specialist, had called it other names than that, but right now he was too busy to waste breath as he moved in staggering lunges around the little cabin of his one-man fighter, plugging in replacement units for equipment damaged by the last near miss of a Berserker missile. An animal resembling a large dog with an ape's forelegs moved around the cabin too, carrying in its nearly human hands a supply of emergency sealing patches. The cabin air was full of haze. Wherever movement of the haze allowed a leak to an unpressurized part of the hull, the dog ape moved to apply a patch. "Hello, Foxglove," the man shouted, hoping that his radio was again in working order. "Hello, Murray. This is Foxglove," said a sudden loud voice in the cabin. "How far did you get?" Dell was too worried to show much relief in his communications that his communications were open again. I'll let you know in a minute. At least it stopped shooting at me for a while. Move, Newton. The alien animal, pet and ally, was called an ion, moved away from the man's feet and kept single-mindedly looking for leaks. After another minute's work, Dell could strap his body into the deep cushioned command chair again, and with something like an operational panel before him. That last near miss had sprayed the whole cabin with fine penetrating splinters. It was remarkable that men and Ion had come through unwounded. His radar working again, Dell could say, "I'm about 90 miles out from it, Foxglove, on the opposite side from you." His present position was the one he had been trying to achieve since the battle had begun. The two Earth ships and the Berserker were half a light year from the nearest sun. The Berserker could not leap out of normal space toward the defenseless colonies on the planets of the sun, while the two ships stayed close to it. There were only two men aboard Foxglove. They had more machinery working for them than did Dell, but both manned ships were mites compared to their opponent. Dell's radar showed him an ancient ruin of metal, not much smaller in cross-section than New Jersey. Men had blown holes in it the size of Manhattan Island and melted puddles of slag as big as lakes upon its surface. But the Berserker's power was still enormous. So far, no man had fought it and survived. Now, it could squash Dell's little ship like a mosquito. It was wasting its unpredictable subtlety on him. Yet, there was a special taste of terror in the very indifference of it. Men could never frighten this enemy as it frightened them. Earthmen's tactics, worked out from the bitter experience against other Berserkers, called for a simultaneous attack by three ships. Foxglove and Murray made two. A third was supposedly on its way, but still about 8 hours distant, moving at C+ velocity, outside of normal space. Until it arrived, Foxglove and Murray must hold the Berserker at bay while it brooded unguessable schemes. It might attack either ship at any moment, or it might seek to disengage. It might wait hours for them to make the first move, though it would certainly fight if the men attacked it. It had learned the languages of Earth's spacemen. It might try to talk with them, but always, ultimately, it would seek to destroy them and every other living thing it met. That was the basic command given it by the ancient warlords. 1,000 years ago, it would easily have swept ships of the type that now opposed it from its path, whether they carried fusion missiles or not. Now, it was in some electrical way conscious of its own weakening by accumulated damage, and perhaps in long centuries of fighting its way across the galaxy, it had learned to be wary. Now, quite suddenly, Dell's detectors showed force fields forming in behind his ship. Like the encircling arms of a huge bear, they blocked his way away from the enemy. He waited for some deadly blow, with his hand trembling over the red button that would salvo his atomic missiles at the Berserker. But if he attacked alone, or even with Foxglove, the infernal machine would parry their missiles, crush their ships, and go on to destroy another helpless planet. The ships were needed to attack. The red firing button was now only a desperate resort. Dell was reporting the force fields to Foxglove when he felt the first hint in his mind of another attack. Newton, he called sharply, leaving the radio connection with Foxglove open. They would hear and understand what was going to happen. The ion hounded instantly from its combat crouch to stand before Dell as if hypnotized, all intention riveted on the man. Dell had sometimes bragged, "Show Newton a drawing of different colored lights and convince him that it represents a particular control panel, and he'll push buttons or whatever you tell him until the real panel matches the drawing." But no ion had the human ability to learn and to create on an abstract level, which was why Dell was now going to put Newton in command of his ship. He switched off the ship's computers. They were going to be useless as his own brain under the attack he felt gathering, and said to Newton, "Situation zombie." The animal responded instantly, as it had been trained. Seizing Dell's hands with firm insistence and dragging them one at a time down beside the command chair to where the fetters had been installed. Hard experience had taught men something about the Berserker's mind weapon, although its principles of operation were still unknown. It was slow in its onslaught, and its effects could not be steadily maintained for more than about 2 hours, after which a Berserker was evidently forced to turn it off for an equal time. But while in effect, it robbed any human or electronic brain of the ability to plan or predict, and left it unconscious of its own capacity. It seemed to Dell that all this had happened before, maybe more than once. Newton, that funny fellow, had gone too far with his pranks. He had abandoned the little boxes of colored beads that were his favorite toys and was moving the controls around at the lighted panel. Unwilling to share the fun with Dell, he had tied the man to his chair somehow. Such behavior was really intolerable, especially when there was supposed to be a battle in progress. Dell tried to pull his hands free and called to Newton. Newton whined earnestly and stayed at the panel. "Newt, you dog, come let me loose. I know what I have to say. 7. Hey, Newt, where's your toys? Let me see your pretty beads." There were hundreds of tiny boxes of the varicolored beads, leftover trade goods that Newton loved to sort out and handle. Dell peered around the cabin, chuckling a little at his own cleverness. He would get Newton distracted by the beads, and then the vague idea faded into other crack-brained grotesqueries. Newton whined now and then, but stayed at the panel, moving controls in the long sequence he had been taught, taking the ship through the feinting, evasive maneuvers that might fool a Berserker into thinking he was still competently manned. Newton never put his hand near the big red button. Only if he felt deadly pain himself or found a dead man in Dell's chair would he reach for that. Roger, Murray, said the radio from time to time, as if acknowledging a message. Sometimes Foxglove added a few words or numbers that might have meant something. Dell wondered what the talking was about. At last, he understood that Foxglove was trying to help maintain the illusion that there was still a competent brain in charge of Dell's ship. The fear reaction came when he began to realize that he had once again lived through the effect of the mind weapon. The brooding berserker, half genius, half idiot, had forborne to press the attack when success would have been certain, perhaps deceived, perhaps following the strategy that avoided predictability at almost any cost. Newton, the animal turned, hearing a change in his voice. Now Adele could say the words that would tell Newton it was safe to set his master free. A sequence too long for anyone under the mind weapon to recite. Shall not perish from the earth, he finished. With a yelp of joy, Newton pulled the fetters from Dell's hands. Dell turned instantly to the radio. The effect has evidently been turned off, Foxglove, said Dell's voice through a speaker in the cabin of the larger ship. The commander let out a sigh. He's back in control. The second officer, there was no third, said, that means we've got some kind of fighting chance for the next 2 hours. I say let's attack again. The commander shook his head, slowly, but without hesitation. With 2 ships, we don't have any real chance. Less than 4 hours and Gizmo gets here. We have to stall until then if we want to win. It'll attack the next time it gets Dell's mind scrambled. I don't think we fooled it for a minute. We're out of range of the mind beam here, but Dell can't withdraw now, and we can't expect the Ion to fight his ship for him. We really have no chance with Dell gone. The commander's eyes moved ceaselessly over his panel. We'll wait. We can't be sure it'll attack the next time it gets the beam on him. The berserker spoke suddenly, its radioed voice playing in the cabins of both ships. I have a proposition for you, little ship. Its voice had a cracking, adolescent quality because it strung together words and syllables recorded from the voices of human prisoners of both sexes and different ages. Bits of human emotion, sorted and fixed like butterflies on pins, thought the commander. There was no reason to think it had kept the prisoners alive after learning the languages from them. Well, Dell's voice sounded tough and capable by any comparison. I have invented a game which we will play, it said. If you play well enough, I will not kill you right away. Now I've heard everything, murmured the second officer. After 3 thoughtful seconds, the commander slammed a fist on the arm of his chair. It means to test his learning ability, to run a continuous check on his brain while it turns up the power of the mind beam and tries different modulations. If it can make sure the mind beam is working, it'll attack instantly. I'll bet my life on it. That's the game it's playing this time. I will think over your proposition, said Dell's voice coolly. The commander said, "It's in no hurry to start. It won't be able to turn on the mind beam again for almost 2 hours. But we need another 2 hours beyond that." Dell's voice said, "Describe the game you want to play." "It is a simplified version of the human game called checkers." The commander and the second looked at each other, neither able to imagine Newton able to play checkers. Nor could they doubt that Newton's failure would kill them within a few hours and leave another planet open to destruction. After a minute's silence, Dell's voice asked, "What'll we use for a board?" "We will radio our moves to one another," said the Berserker equably. It went on to describe a checkers-like game played on a smaller board with less than the normal number of pieces. And there was nothing very profound about it. But of course, playing would seem to require a functional brain, human or electronic, able to plan and predict. "If I agree to play," said Dell slowly, "how will we decide who gets to move first?" "He's trying to stall," said the commander, gnawing a thumbnail. "We won't be able to offer any advice with that thing listening. Oh, stay sharp, Dell boy." "To simplify matters," said the Berserker, "I will move first in every game." Dell could look forward to another hour free of the mind weapon when he finished rigging the checkerboard. When the pegged pieces were moved, appropriate signals would be radioed to the Berserker. Lighted squares on the board would show him where its pieces were moved. If it spoke to him while the mind weapon was on, Dell's voice would answer from a tape, which he had stocked with vaguely aggressive phrases such as, "Get on with the game," or "Do you want to give up now?" He hadn't told the enemy how far along he was with his preparations, because he was still busy with something the enemy must not know. The system that was going to enable Newton to play a game of simplified checkers. Dell gave a soundless little laugh as he worked and glanced over to where Newton was lounging on the couch, clutching toys in his hands as if he drew some comfort from them. This scheme was going to push the Ion near the limit of his ability, but Dell saw no reason why it should fail. They had completely analyzed the miniature checker game and diagrammed every position that Newton could possibly face, playing only even numbered moves. Thank the random Berserker for that specification, as on small cards. Dell had discarded some lines of play that would arise from some poor early moves by Newton, further simplifying his job. Now, on a card showing each possible remaining position, Dell could quickly teach Newton to play the game by looking at the appropriate card and making the move shown by the arrow. "Uh-oh," said Dell as his hands stopped working and he stared into space. Newton whined at the tone of his voice. Once Dell had sat at the board in a simultaneous chess exposition, one of 60 players opposing the world champion, Blankenship. Dell had held his own into the middle game. Then, when the great man paused again opposite his board, Dell had moved a pawn forward thinking he had reached an unassailable position and could begin a counterattack. Blankenship had moved a rook to an innocent-looking square and strolled on to the next board. And then Dell had seen the checkmate coming at him 4 moves away, but 1 move too late for him to do something about it. The commander suddenly said a foul phrase in a loud, distinct voice. Such conduct on his part was extremely rare, and the second officer looked around in surprise. What? I think we've had it. The commander paused. I hoped that Murray could set up some kind of system over there so that Newton could play the game, or appear to be playing it, but it won't work. Whatever system Newton plays by rote will always have him making the same move in the same position. It may be a perfect system, but a man doesn't play any game that way, damn it. He always makes mistakes. He changes strategy. Even in a game this simple, there'll be room for that. Most of all, a man learns a game as he plays it. He gets better as he goes along. That's what'll give Newton away, and that's what our bandit wants. It's probably heard almost about ions. Now, as soon as it can be sure it's facing a dumb animal over here and not a man or a computer, after a little while, the second officer said, I'm getting signals of their moves. They've begun to play. Maybe we should have rigged up a board so we could follow along with the game. We better just be ready to go at it when the time comes. The commander looked helplessly at his salvo button and then at the clock that showed 2 hours must pass before Gizmo could reasonably be hoped for. Soon, the second officer said, that seems to be the end of the first game. Dell lost it. I'm reading their scoreboard, right? He paused. Sir, there's that signal we picked up the last time it turned the mind beam on. Dell must be starting to get it again. There was nothing for the commander to say. The 2 men waited silently for the enemy's attack, hoping only that they could damage it in seconds before it would overwhelm and kill them. He's playing the second game, said the second officer. And I just heard him say, let's get on with it. His voice could be recorded. He must have made some plan of play for Newton to follow, but it won't fool the Berserker for long. Time crept unmeasurably along. The second said, he's lost the first 4 games, but he's not making the same moves every time. I wish we'd made a board. Shut up about the board. We'd be watching it instead of the panel. Now stay alert, mister. After what seemed like a long time, the second said, well, I'll be. What? Our side got a draw on that game. Then the beam can't be on him. Are you sure? It is. Look, here. The same indication we got last time. It's been on him the better part of an hour now, and getting stronger. The commander stared in disbelief, but he knew and trusted his second's ability. And the panel indications were convincing. He said, then someone or something with no functioning mind is learning how to play a game over there. Ha ha, he added, as if trying to remember how to laugh. The Berserker won another game, another draw, another win for the enemy. Then 3 drawn games in a row. Once, the second officer heard Dell's voice ask coolly, "Do you want to give up now?" On the second move, he lost another game, but the following game ended in another draw. Dell was plainly taking more time than his enemy to move, but not enough to make the enemy impatient. "It's trying different modulations on the mind beam," said the second. "And it's got the power turned way up." "Yeah," said the commander. Several times he had tried to radio Dell to say something that might keep the man's spirits up, and also to relieve his own feverish inactivity, and to try to find out what could possibly be going on. But he could not take the chance. Any interference might upset the miracle. He could not believe the inexplicable success could last, even when the checker match turned gradually into an endless succession of drawn games between 2 perfect players. Hours ago, the commander had said goodbye to life and hope as he waited for the final fatal moment. And he waited. "Not perish from the earth," said Dell, and Newton's eager hands flew to loose his right arm from the shackle. A game, unfinished on the little board before him, had been abandoned seconds earlier. The mind beam had been turned off at the same time, when Gizmo had burst into normal space, right in position, and only 5 minutes late. And the Berserker had been forced to turn all its energies to meet the immediate all-out attack of Gizmo and Foxglove. Dell saw his computers recovering from the effect of the beam, lock his aiming screen onto the Berserker's scarred and bulging midsection as he shot his right arm forward, scattering pieces from the game board. "Checkmate," he roared out hoarsely, and brought his fist down on the big red button. "I'm glad it didn't want to play chess," Dell said later, talking to the commander in Foxglove's cabin. "I could never have rigged that up." The ports were cleared now, and the men could look out at the cloud of expanding gas, still faintly luminous, that had been a Berserker, metal fire purged of the legacy of ancient evil. But the commander was watching Dell. You got Newt to play by following diagrams. I see that. But how could he learn the game?" Dell grinned. "He couldn't, but his toys could. Now wait before you slug me." He called the Ion to him and took a small box from the animal's hand. The box rattled faintly as he held it up. On its cover was pasted a diagram of one possible position in the simplified checker game, with a different colored arrow indicating each possible move of Dell's pieces. "It took 100 of these boxes," said Dell. This one was in the group that Newt examined for the 4th time. When he found a box with a diagram matching its position on the board, he picked the box up and pulled out one of these beads from the inside without looking. "And that was the hardest part to teach him in a hurry, by the way," said Dell, demonstrating. "Ah, this one's blue. That means make the move indicated on the cover by blue arrow. Now, the orange arrow heads to a poor position, see?" Dell shook all the beads out of the box into his hand. No orange beads left. There were 6 left of each color when we started. But every time Newton drew a bead, He had orders to leave it out of the box until the game was over. Then, if the scoreboard indicated a loss for our side, he went back and threw away all the beads he had used. All the moves were gradually eliminated. In a few hours, Newt and his boxes learned to play the game perfectly. Well, said the commander. He thought for a moment, then reached down to scratch Newton behind the ears. I never would have come up with that idea. I should have thought of it sooner. The basic idea is a couple of centuries old, and computers are supposed to be my business. This could be a big thing, said the commander. I mean, your basic idea might be useful to any task force that has to face a berserker's mind beam. Yeah, Del grew reflective. Also, what? I was thinking of a guy I met once named Blankenship. I wonder if I could rig something up. End of part 1, Berserker, Without a Thought.